Okay, so I like the old one better. This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that we're beginning at 11B1. That's pretty much where we are. But we can just review the real quick what we had at 11A5. There was a Braita that taught that there were three kings who ruled the entire world. Malchu mechipa. Kippah means the dome of heaven. So they were like universal. Hold on a second here. Universal monarchs that whose reign extended all across the world. Everywhere under heaven. And we had the three mentioned, Achav and Achashverosh and Nebuchadnezzar, and they adduced the various verses to prove that this is so for both Achav and Nebuchadnezzar. And then they say Achashverosh ruled the entire world, as we already mentioned, right? From one end of the world to the other, 127 provinces or states or kingdoms, his grip on his empire was sure. So these were three, world emperors. So now we're on 11B1. Just a word about this being a Braita. Right? It's a Braita, means that it didn't make it into the Mishnah, but it is a rabbinic teaching that was remembered, recorded, and passed down. What's the point of saying this? What does it have any legal significance? Does it have any spiritual significance? Does it have any meaning besides the fact of being a kind of a historical footnote? What is what's this all about? So, anybody have any suggestions? Why is this preserved as a codified rabbinic tradition?
I want to say that it had legal bearing on things, but I'm not quite sure if that's right. If obviously if it was regarded as central, I shouldn't say obviously, but one can imagine that if it was regarded as an absolutely central teaching, it would have been included in the Mishnah. On the other hand, I remember reading about this in another book about the compilation of the Bible. There's a physical limit on how much stuff you can put into a codex or how much you can put on a scroll. There's a limit.
Right. So you're speaking to the point that it's not included in the top 10 teachings of the rabbis,
yeah.
Right? But I'm asking a different question. Why is it included in anything? Why is it included in the appendix? What's the point?
Because it bears on.
How? That's my question. How does it bear on anything?
It brings other Talmudic teachers to bear on whatever the question is. Why it wasn't included? I don't know.
So I'm not asking why it wasn't included. I'm again asking, what is the significance? Why are we supposed to remember that there were three monarchs who had this kind of world expansive reach and were in control of almost a worldwide empire? Who cares? I mean, that's history.
I have no answer.
Right. Okay. So a few other hands I saw were raised a little bit. Huh? Okay, Merle.
Could it be that it's a suggestion or an example of the fact that there's other wisdom out there that not just the codified wisdom but there's other wisdom that we should also pay attention to?
Okay.
Something like that.
So that comes, I think, closer to I think the main question that my question is based on. What's the relationship then between all the wisdoms. What's the relationship between rabbinic wisdom per se and all the other wisdoms that are out there? We have in the Talmud is this vast, complicated, in some ways, almost Byzantine collection of teachings. And besides discussions of, Jewish law and Jewish moral issues, every once in a while it has these kinds of other kinds of discussions that that are not at all halachic or even quote unquote obviously Jewish. But they talk about the astrology, or they talk about medicine, or they talk about all kinds of other things. So your point, Merle's point, is that there's a lot of stuff out there, and nothing exists in complete isolation, right? You need to have a worldly awareness in order to apply the Torah in this world. So we have the evidence here and there of rabbis being engaged in all kinds of other disciplines that are not strictly Jewishly identifiable or uniquely Jewish. So I think that there's something to that. The case that we have here, I think doesn't quite. I think it has a little bit of a different flavor to it, and in that sense, it's actually, for me, I think a little bit the opposite. Are there other kings that had big empires? The Gemara is actually going to ask that in another second. What about this king? What about that king? And there'll be answers. But one of the points here is this is very actually Judeo-centric. Each of the three monarchs that are mentioned here are significant in Jewish history, right? And each of them actually is a monarch who is an enemy of the Jewish people. So these are not neutral characters, and it's not simply here's a list. Memorize this list. The three greatest emperors in world history. No, this is actually highlighting both from within and without three major powerful rulers who had it in for the Jewish people and the Jewish way of life as understood by the sages, by the traditionalists. Right? Achav was murdering prophets right and left. He and his wife Jezebel, right? Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple. Achashverosh allows Haman gives Haman permission to exterminate the Jews. So the unsaid part of this Breita is maybe even the more important part of the Breita, right? The unsaid part of the Breita is, and look at where they are and look at where we are, right? The three most powerful, potentates, to be tautological, that we can think of, all of their power that was brought to bear against us in the end somehow fizzled out. We somehow survived. Not to say that there wasn't tremendous damage that was done, but we kept on going despite the designs, the agendas of these people who had the entire world in their hands. So I think that that's part of what is being said here in a kind of oblique way. Any other comments on this? Okay, so now we go to 11b1. And I want to welcome everybody to our group. We have a new name that some people might not recognize, of a new person coming that joined the session. So happy to have everybody here. Okay, 11B1, top of the page, the Breita. Who's going to read for us today? Come on, stop grumbling. All right, Bill, thank you. All right, but you're on mute. We can't hear you grumbling.
I wasn't grumbling. I was apologizing. I'm starting to feel embarrassed about being the one to do this. Nobody appointed me the lector.
I did.
But okay. Anyway, I'm here. Okay.
Is that
11B.
and is the first name Hannibal?
Funny.
Good.
Top of page 11B1. The Baraita stated that only 3 people ruled over the entire world. The Gemara challenges this statement, citing others who wielded absolute power. They are introduced with a mnemonic formula. A mnemonic, siman simach dach, or simach dach.
Shastach.
Shastach, sorry.
Shastach is Shin Samach Dalid Chaf.
Valid.
Right? So we're going to get, it's going to be Shlomo, Sancheiriv,
Darius, and Cyrus.
Daryavesh, and Koresh. Right? So
And
in
Cyrus.
English, Darius and Cyrus.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Here we go.
Are there no more? But there was Solomon, who ruled over the entire world. Why did the Baraita fail to mention him? The Gemara answers, Solomon's reign was not completed, whereas those mentioned in the Baraita did complete their reign. Therefore, he was not mentioned together with them.
Okay. So there's a note. Did we get to note 2 yet?
Not quite.
Not quite. So note 2 says see Gittin 68b. So this business that Solomon's reign was not completed alludes to a discussion in that other Gemara, which tells a story about Solomon, Shlomo, and the king of the demons, Ashmedai. And in that story, Ashmedai outwits Shlomo. Shlomo has Ashmedai captive, and Shlomo is the king of the whole world. And then, Shlomo, because he's, curious, he always wants to seek more wisdom. He ends up tripping himself up. Ashmedai takes advantage of his curiosity and his a little bit of his, what can I say, smugness or self-assurance, and turns the table on Shlomo. And instead of him being in chains, he makes Shlomo be in chains. And Ashmedai takes on Shlomo's appearance, and he becomes the king. And Shlomo is dethroned. He loses his kingdom. So this is a story. Well, when we finish, Megillah, maybe we'll start learning Gittin, and by the time we get to Gittin 68b, we'll get to that story. But that's the story over there. So Shlomo, according to that legend, lost his kingship. And that's why the Gemara says here, he didn't make it all the way. The other kings died with their boots on. But Shlomo was deposed. So that's why he's not in the list. Of course, what I was saying before, adds a different side to the question. Shlomo wasn't trying to destroy the Jewish people, was he? Maybe that's why he's not in the list. But that's not the way the Gemara takes its discussion. So, but the Gemara is now going to add a little bit more to that.
The Gemara objects. This explanation is satisfactory according to the one who said that Solomon was king and afterward became a commoner and never fully regained his crown. That's where note 2 comes in.
Yeah.
However, according to the one who said that Solomon was king and then became a commoner and was then reinstated as king, that is, he completed his reign with his authority intact, what is there to say to explain why Solomon was not mentioned in the Baraita?
Okay, so this alludes again to that Gemara in Gittin. And there you have 2 opinions, whether it was Melech v'Hedyot or Melech v'Hedyot u'Melech. Was he king and then commoner and that's it. He was finally deposed and never regained his rulership? Or was he a king, then he was deposed, and then he was restored to the throne? So this is two different stories about how you tell that story with Ashmedai, with the demon king. So the Gemara here says, your answer assumes that he never resumed his monarchy, but according to the other person, he should be included in the list. He made it, right? He restored, he defeated the demon and got back to becoming the king. So why isn't he in there with the world, leaders? That's the question. Okay, so we're going to get an answer, and then we'll try to, digest a little bit more about what this is about. Go ahead.
The Gemara answers that Solomon's reign was unique. Solomon had something else about him that the others mentioned in the Baraita did not have, namely that he reigned over the upper beings in addition to reigning over the lower beings. For it is written, and Solomon sat on the throne of God. Since Solomon's monarchy was unique, the Baraita did not include him with the others.
Okay, so the answer is that in some way, Solomon doesn't fit with the other ones. There's something very, very different about Solomon's monarchy. And the verse that is quoted is that Solomon ends up sitting on God's throne, Al Kisei Hashem. So he ruled, so according to the way that it's phrased here, over the celestial beings, the upper beings, Elyonim, the higher beings, Ve Tachtonim, and the lower beings. So the lower beings is us, is human beings. He was a king over, the worldly realm, but he was also the king over celestial beings. And we have in the note that Rashi specifically, and everybody follows this, the celestial being sounds very, very impressive and very nice, but actually they're not talking about the angels, they're talking about the demons. And that's, of course, the root of that story with Solomon and Ashmedai, the king of the demons. So where Solomon is trying to establish his rule, and then Ashmedai either totally or at least temporarily defeats Solomon. So these are these mythic stories that have been added to the Solomonic history, we can take them as we wish. But what, again, my question all the way at the beginning, what is this functioning to what's its function? What is this mythic discourse about? I want to take some of the elements that are mentioned here and take them a little more seriously than simply saying, oh, this is Baba Mises, this is literally fairy tales, demon tales that are told about this king. Solomon was unique. Solomon was the one and only monarch in Israel who presided over a united kingdom centered around a temple in Jerusalem to serve God. When we think about the central image of that in our tradition, it's like ubiquitous. That's, all of our prayers are about that, all of our, concepts, all of our images about what Judaism, in its ideal state is supposed to be. Of course, we talk about David much more than Solomon. David was the visionary, but Solomon made it happen. Solomon, David's son, makes the temple, get done. And yet his, Camelot-y kind of moment crashes down after his own death. Right? It doesn't last. And we've talked about this before. It doesn't last because of mistakes that he himself committed that ruined what should have been this wonderful, beautiful, climactic accomplishment. of everything that the Bible promised. You'll come to the promised land, you'll build a house for me, we'll all be together in peace and harmony. And the establishment of that reality was tinged with mistakes and with evil throughout the process because of Solomon's own hubris. So Solomon is a complicated guy. If we think David is a complicated guy, and he is, and everybody else actually is also complicated, everybody, present company included, but nevertheless, as a figure, Solomon has this back and forth, and to a certain extent, that's part of what this like mythic statement is about. That Solomon has control over the demonic, but then he loses control over the demonic. Did he ever reestablish himself and get back on God's seat? So God's seat is this, again, mythic concept of divine rule, divine presence that takes in all of reality and makes sure everything is done right. Our beautiful blessing that we say at the beginning of Mariv, God sets up all the stars exactly in their right place. God makes everything happen exactly the way it should happen. This is God's seat. So Solomon, when he establishes the temple, he has established his own rulership and he's established God's rulership, and God is happy with that. Nevertheless, it's like the light of a candle. It gets blown out very, very quickly. So I would read all of this kind of like fairy tale-y imagery as being an expression of that kind of wondering, that folk wondering about what do we do with this guy? What do we do with this super talented, super motivated person who has such a mixed legacy? Yeah, Jen.
Can we then blame the mixed part of the legacy on Asmodeus and exonerate Solomon? He wasn't in charge at that point. All the disastrous things that happened were Asmodeus's fault.
No, we're not going to go all the way back to that story, but Ashmedai, Asmodeus, as you're saying, is let in by Solomon.
I'm pretty sure Asmodeus that we have in like D&D lore and stuff is based on.
Yeah. But it's Solomon's choice. It's Solomon's actions that opened the door for the demons, for the demonic.
So they are not held in order to exonerate him. They're held to deal with the mixed legacy, not to exonerate him from them.
No. And it's hard to examine. Look, in the biblical story, without getting into demons, the biblical story is critical of Solomon for making the choices that he made. He thought he could get away with marrying every single princess in the world in order to establish his worldwide hegemony. And he said, okay, I'll be able to, marry this pagan princess and this pagan princess because it's all for the sake of God. I'm going to create this wonderful empire for God. And in the end, he falls prey to his own hubris, to his own passions. So it's one of those classic human downfall stories. Yeah, Stuart.
Yeah, I was just reading this text with my chavruta, so I was thinking about it. I was looking. This is in 1 Kings. Chapter 11. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart turned away from the Lord, because he has all these foreign wives and he's practicing, pagan things. And then it says in verse 14, the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, the Edomite Hadad, who was of the royal family of Edom. And the notes, translation in the Jewish Study Bible says that the Hebrew, the word that's translated as adversary is in Hebrew is Satan. Related to Satan. it's the interesting thing here. So Solomon, has deviated from what God wanted. That this, what you call the Camelot last, such a brief shining moment, or whatever the expression is. But then God raises up an adversary against Solomon. So his way of punishing Solomon is by creating this discord, I guess, or those, God bears some responsibility for this.
Well, what God is saying is, I'm not going to let this guy get away placidly with ruining everything. So I'm going to shake things up here. So the punishment is by creating an opponent. The word Satan is that opponent. Then it becomes, saturated with the idea of Satan and demons and so on and so forth. But its original, meaning is an opponent, an adversary.
Yeah.
And it's great that you're bringing that text up. I think that's very, very much feeding everything that became part of the tradition about Solomon, so that the Satan becomes an expansive concept, and Ashmedai, Asmodeus, is a Satan figure, and we mix it all together.
Right.
But the God's response here is a response to a prior failure and transgression on the part of Solomon.
But no one can hold it together even for a single generation. It's just,
Except us. We're great. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Look, that's the leitmotif in the Torah again and again and again. As I've insisted many times, that's the amazing optimism of the Torah. In the Torah, in its expansive meaning, the Tanakh and beyond, that it never forgets how many times we fail. It never forgets how many times we really choose evil, not just badly or mistakenly. Evil. It doesn't sugarcoat the evil, and nevertheless, it never relinquishes its belief that we can get it right.
You could read some of the history of modern Israel the same way. But
to get political, the only way I can keep going, given the recent history in Israel, is to say, okay, but it's not over yet. It's not over. We can actually create some good stuff too. So the fact that that right now things are terrible, we've been there before. We've had terrible epochs of Jewish living, and we've come out of it. And the idea that if we only come out of it temporarily, that doesn't count. That can't be. Now that cannot be. A partial good is a good. A short-lived good is a good, and it's not bad just because it's short-lived. It's a good, and then you just keep hoping that it can be made to last even longer. So, yeah. All right. So this is the sad and complicated case of Shlomo. Okay. Next.
The Gemara again challenges the Baraita. But there was Sennacherib, who also reigned over the entire world, as it is written, which of the gods of these lands have saved their land from my hand, which implies that he conquered every land. Why then was Sennacherib not mentioned in the Baraita? The Gemara answers, but there was Jerusalem, which he did not conquer. Thus he did not reign over the entire world, unlike those mentioned in the Baraita.
Okay, here the failure is a different kind of failure. Here the failure is that he didn't he laid siege to Jerusalem, but then he mysteriously and miraculously ended his siege and ran away. So Sancherib destroyed the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, but he didn't destroy the southern kingdom, Judea, and the temple itself. So therefore, he doesn't count. And so paradoxically, he doesn't get credit for being one of the great worldwide rulers who was an enemy of the Jewish people, because he, of his own accord, gave up when he was right at the threshold of coming and taking Jerusalem and destroying the temple. So he's not included in this. Okay. Anybody else comment? Hold on a second. No. Going once, twice. Okay.
The Gemara again disputes the Baraita, but there was Darius who reigned over the entire world. As it is written, King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that live in all the earth, your peace should multiply. The Gemara answers, but there were 7 provinces over which he did not rule. For it is written, it pleased Darius, and he appointed over the kingdom 120 satraps. Since Darius's authority did not extend to these 7 provinces, he is not included in the Baraita.
Right. What are the 7 provinces? We don't know. I'm not talking about names, but how do we know that there are another 7 provinces besides the 120? Because
Ahasuerus ruled over
Right,
127.
because we have 127 provinces under Ahasuerus's rule. So he was small potatoes. He was only 120 provinces. So he doesn't make it into the top 3, right? So that's it. Okay. Yeah.
The Gemara again challenges the Baraita, but there was Cyrus who reigned over the entire world. For it is written, so says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth has God given me. That being the case, why was Cyrus ignored by the Baraita? The Gemara replies that Cyrus's own pronouncement is unreliable. In that instance, Cyrus was praising himself, but with scant regard for the truth. Therefore, the Baraita omitted him from the list of authentic world rulers.
All right, so there's a little bit of a kind of a playful development here. From by the time we get to Darius and to Cyrus, we're not exactly saying stuff that we should take too seriously, right? There's a kind of a snarky thing. Oh, Cyrus says that he rules the whole world. You can't take the evidence from him.
But don't we like Cyrus? I thought we liked Cyrus.
So yeah, so that's an interesting point, right? But they're sort of like putting, his tweet is not real news, right? He says it himself. The irony is what Jen is saying is that Cyrus is actually a good guy.
A good guy.
Right? Cyrus is the one who gives the Jewish people permission to return home. Let me get a Tanakh for a second. And if I can find the place here. It's the last verse in the entire Tanakh. So it shouldn't be that hard to find the place.
You would think.
But here it is. Kol Amar Koresh, this is what we quoted in the Gemara, right? So says Koresh, king of Persia. Kol mamlechot haaretz natan li Hashem Elokei hashamayim. All of the kingdoms of the earth were given to me by the eternal, the almighty God of heaven. Right? So sounds pretty good, actually, right? Wouldn't you like somebody to say that? V'hu pakad alai livnot lo bayit b'Yerushalayim. And he charged me to build for God a house in Jerusalem, Asher b'Yehuda, which is in Judea. Mi bachem mikol amo, Hashem Elokav imo vayal. So who among you from all of God's people, right? The eternal, his almighty God. Any of you out there from God's people, let God be with him and let him go up and do so. That's the end of our Tanakh. That's how our whole gigantic, the world is created, Bereshit bara Elokim. And then by the time we get to the end of it, it's this guy named Koresh who says, I am actually recognizing God as the God of all of heaven and earth. And God gave me a job to do, which was to make sure that a house gets built for him in Jerusalem. So I'm giving this, I'm delegating. Who among the Jews wants to now go up and build that house? So this is not chronologically the end of the Tanakh. Chronologically, the story, the history of the Jewish people is continued by the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So, but the way that we decided to make the order of the canon, we chose this to be the ending verse of our scripture. A call to us. Are we going to respond? Right? We have the permission. The gatekeeper is opening the door. Right? The rest of the world is not the rest of the world is not standing in our way. So will we go up? Will we arise, ascend, and go to Jerusalem and build God a home or not? So the whole thing ends so Jewish, right? Our holy scriptures end with a question. There's a question mark. Who among you would like to go up? That's the end. Finished. So this verse that's quoted here and is being put down, saying, that's Koresh just blowing his own horn, right? He's just bragging about himself. But that doesn't prove that he really, was everywhere and all powerful. So we should take that also with a kind of like a little bit of a grain of salt. That's why I think that my suggestion beforehand is important to bear in mind. The three that are mentioned in the Braita are enemies of the Jewish people whose designs were thwarted. That's the main point. And then when we start bringing up all these other examples, we see that they don't quite fit into that model. And Koresh definitely doesn't fit into that model. But then there's a problem. There's a problem for us. We take great strength and satisfaction in telling the story of how everybody is out to get us. We take, comfort almost in the binary of the us and them, because it makes us, holy victims. And the underdog is always considered, somebody that we should root for. So we can root for ourselves. Koresh's question, where the Tanakh ends, puts it all back on us, doesn't it? So by saying, that's Koresh, we don't have to listen to him. We don't have to pay attention to that verse. That's sadly a very, very human response to try to shirk responsibility. It's saying, I don't have to listen to that guy. That guy is full of himself. And therefore, I don't have to pay attention to the end of the verse. The end of the verse says, hello, Jewish person. What are you going to be doing to serve God? Right? I can forget about that part. Jen.
So just a historic question. This part of the Talmud, is this all from Babylonia?
Yeah.
Are the people who are writing this the descendants of people who didn't go back up? They stayed and made a wonderful community in Babylonia.
Yes and no, because by this time there's a very lively population movement back and forth.
Okay.
So there are Jews from the land of Israel who have moved to Babylonia as it becomes a land of opportunity. There are Babylonian Jews that have moved to the land of Israel. By this point, yes, Babylonia is the preeminent Jewish community, but there's definitely lively interchange between the two communities. But you're right.
But
There
it's not
is
necessarily a loyalty to like your
there
ancestors.
is
in
there are
Babylon.
different parts in the Talmud where we can see some of the rivalry, and where we can see the Babylonians saying, you know what, we're actually back to we're actually better, which is very typical. Look at America. And back in Europe before the Shoah, were many people that said, are you kidding? This is the greatest Jewish community that in history, Germany or Lithuania or New York. So people have, I remember many years ago, I was visiting London. We went to Shul on Shabbos, and a person came over to us. Where are you from? We were on our way back from Israel, from studying in Israel. We were on our way back to the States. And this person looked at us and with such a smugness said, but you have to admit, the best place in the world for the Jews is England. It was like, it's like obvious, look at this synagogue, look at our community, look at how great, everything is here. So, yes, that's a continuous thread, in Jewish history as well. Yes. All right. Anybody else? Somebody else? Oh, wait, Sylvia wrote something. Hold on, in the chat. Not Sylvia. David Kanagis says, in what book do we find Koresh? So I just read to you from the last verse of Chronicles, right? And he's also in other places, which I can't recall at the moment. Okay, so there he is. If you get, so look up Cyrus, and you'll find them in different places. Okay, okay, and all right, enough of that for now. Oh, good. I think we continue.
The Gemara returns to its exegesis of the Megillah.
Okay, so now we're back to, again, going phrase by phrase, verse by verse, looking at the beginning of the scroll of Esther and unpacking some of the hidden meanings in those words. Go.
The Gemara returns to its exegesis of the Megillah. In those days when the king sat. The Gemara understands the Megillah to mean when he first sat, that is, at the beginning of his reign. However, it is written immediately afterward in the 3rd year of his reign, an explicit statement that the events to be described forthwith occurred a few years later. What's going on?
Okay, so this is verse 2 of the Megillah, right? So we finished expounding the first verse, and now we're on the second verse, and this is the setup verse for the first of the many parties, drinking parties, that are a major motif in the story, right? Verse 3, in the 3rd year of his kingship, Asa mishteh b'chol sarav v'avadav. He made a mishteh, a drinking party, for all of his servants and ministers and so on, and counselors. So the Gemara says, wait a second. When it says kishevet, which we could understand as at the very moment when he took his seat as king, right, when he first became king, and then the next verse says it's 3 years later. So which one is it? Is it immediately, did he make this mishteh immediately when he first became king? Or he waited a while, 3 years, so then what's the beginning part? Why do we have to mention that? Why don't we just have the second verse, which is verse 3, which says, and 3 years after he became king, he made a party. Why does it have to be introduced by saying, in those days, when he assumed the kingship, etc.? So what's the answer?
The Gemara answers. Rava said, what is the meaning of when he sat? After his mind was put at ease in the 3rd year with regard to the fate of his Jewish subjects, he celebrated with a great feast.
Okay, so he reads the word keshevet, HaMelech Achashverosh, when he sat down. he reads that as nityashva dato. He settled down emotionally, psychologically. He felt more secure in his rulership. It took 3 years, and now finally, keshevet hamelech. He's already, like the word Shabbat. Now he's resting. Now he really feels he's at rest. So, but what did it took 3 years for? Why was it those 3 years? So, the answer is that he was concerned a little bit about the relationship between his rulership and the Jewish people. Here we go. At that time,
Achashverosh said, Belshazzar, the former king of Babylon, calculated the 70 years of exile, but erred in his calculation. However, I calculated the 70 years, and concluding that now, in the 3rd year of my reign, they are complete, and I have not erred in my calculation.
okay,
In my conclusion.
Right, good. So the idea being that there was a prophecy, we're going to look at it for a second more extensively in note 13. There was a prediction at the destruction of the first temple that the whole tragedy would conclude after 70 years. So then the question is, how do you count the 70 years? Look at note 13.
Note 13. The prophet Jeremiah had foretold that the Jews would be redeemed from their Babylonian exile after 70 years. For thus said God, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I shall remember you to return you to this place. However, Jeremiah did not clarify how these 70 years were to be calculated. Each of the Gentile kings who ruled the Jews in this exile was aware of Jeremiah's prophecy and with great anxiety awaited the deadline, each according to his own calculation. Thus, the passing of those 70 years with the Jews, still a subject nation, was cause for celebration.
Okay, so this is, of course, all of this is entering into the minds of the kings from our perspective. How much, this was part of their daily concerns. You can speculate about, but from our perspective, we're saying these guys are sitting they're for 70 years. Each of the emperors is wondering, how long will I be able to maintain my grip on the Jewish people? Is it really true that after 70 years they will be let free again? We have this as again also a kind of a recurrent motif throughout Jewish tradition and then later on in Christian tradition. So we have, for instance, the Midrash that says that Pharaoh was told by his counselors that watch out, there's going to be a redeemer of Israel who's going to be born among the babies. And that's how we understand, according to that legend, why Pharaoh says, okay, throw out all the male babies into the river. Let's get rid of them, right? Because he's trying to overcome a prophecy. This is a major motif in fairy tales all over the world, right? Somebody gets told that there's the prediction about what's going to happen, and then they spend all of their energy trying to subvert that prediction, right? When the forest of Dulcinea will come down or whatever it is, how does that go? Jen, do you remember how does the line go?
I don't remember the exact line, but the idea is when it moves and then
Right.
the
Right.
forest can move.
Right. So
I feel like Shakespeare was actually stretching it a little bit there, but yeah.
but he's working from that motif, right? Yeah. This is there's a prediction when something happens or a time period elapses, or then that's it. And of course that story about Pharaoh and Moses becomes an important legend in Jewish tradition. The question of Jesus' birth and the Roman attempts to get rid of him is a similar situation. And here we're seeing this as the kings are really worried what's going to happen with this prediction. And the way that the Gemara is reading this is that Achashverosh says, the 70 years have finally been used up, have come and gone, and clearly nothing has happened. So now we can rest easy and nothing more will happen. However, a predecessor, Belshazzar, he thought that it was all over and he was wrong. Okay, let's look at note 14.
Note 14. Belshazzar, the last Babylonian king, ruled from 3386 to 3389. He was overthrown by Darius the Mede. The chart below provides the background information for the passage of Gemara to follow.
Okay, so when it says 3386, where are they, what kind of years are they looking at? Look at the table and look at the asterisk, years of rule.
From the creation.
Right. So this is taking that we live now in the year 5781.
81.
Okay, so Belshazzar lived in 3386. So that's, what is that, 2,000 and approximately 2,400 years ago, right? So if you go backwards that way, you end up that he lived around 538 BCE. I did my homework. I started writing a little, corresponding chart. So so that's when he was, and he was overthrown by Darius, the first Darius, who was a Mede, and then later on we're going to have Darius, who's a Persian emperor, general and emperor. Right? Okay, so this is all this. So what happened was with Belshazzar is that Belshazzar thought that the time was over. How did he actually do the counting? It's not for us right now important, but he figured, okay, the curse, so to speak, or the prediction is canceled, and now I can celebrate. But then he ends up being warned, no, this is it. You're an enemy of the Jewish people. It's not going to be good for you. Okay, so let's now go Belshazzar's faulty calculations.
The Gemara now discusses Belshazzar's faulty calculations. What was Belshazzar's reckoning and how did he err? As it is written, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I shall remember you. And it is written, to complete the 70 years from the ruins of Jerusalem. Belshazzar understood that the 70 years for Babylon, mentioned in the first verse, commenced with the ascension of the first Babylonian, Nebuchadnezzar, to the throne. Therefore calculated the 70 years as follows: 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and 23 years of evil Merodach's reign, and 2 years of his own reign. Thus, total 70 years from the founding of the kingdom of Babylon. Since the Jews were still under foreign domination after the passage of these 70 years, Belshazzar concluded that Jeremiah's prophecy had been nullified. He therefore brought out the plundered vessels of the Holy Temple and used them at a great banquet attended by his noblemen.
Right. So what we have here, by the way, evil Merodach is not English. The word evil there is evil. It's just a translation.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Evil Merodach.
not your fault, but it just, we shouldn't understand. It's not a judgment. That's his name in Aramaic, Evil Merodach.
Evil Merodach, okay.
So, okay. So according to this way of looking at it, Belshazzar is making the calculations from his own point of view. Right? He's not doing it from the Jewish point of view, something that happened to the Jewish people, and then 70 years later. He's starting from Nebuchadnezzar's own beginning of his rule. You have the chart there, and you have the Gemaras here saying you add this number of years and this number of years. So he thought that the coast was clear in 538, and of course he was wrong. So the 70 years had not yet been fully used up. Okay. Question, apropos.
Apropos to Belshazzar's reckoning, the Gemara inquires, and how do we know that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for a total of 45 years? The Gemara replies, as Master said, they were exiled in the 7th, They were exiled in the 8th. They were exiled in the 18th. They were exiled in the 19th. The Gemara now explains that the first half of this enigmatic statement actually refers to one exile. The exile of Jehoiachin occurred in the 7th year following Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jehoiachim, which was the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The second half of the statement also refers to one exile. The exile of Zedekiah occurred in the 18th year following Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jehoiakim, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Now, how do we know that Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jehoiakim in the 2nd year of his reign? For Master said, in the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nineveh was conquered. In the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Jehoiakim was conquered.
Okay, so what we have here is, again, the sages looking at their local regional history and putting their own experience into the context of a more far-reaching set of circumstances. So Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylonia. Babylonia, the world empires shift from one to the other. We had already before, what was his name? Sancherib. So that's the Assyrians. So the Assyrians are defeated by the Babylonians. Eventually, then there's a Median interlude, and then the Persians come in. So one empire goes down in the face of the next empire. So this is the moving cavalcade of a human history, which we, observe and witness from our own kind of peculiar place. Right? We're subject to oppression. We're subject to certain focus of attention, and then we watch the big guys slug it out among themselves and defeat each other, while we suffer, but we continue. So Nebuchadnezzar first has to conquer the Assyrians. That he does in the 1st year of his rule. In the 2nd year of his rule, he comes to Jerusalem and he subjugates Jehoiakim. Then Jehoiakim has the prince Jehoiachin. Jehoiachin is still in Jerusalem, and then he finally gets exiled. The temple is not destroyed yet, and so on and so on. So we have all of these different years shifting back and forth between Nebuchadnezzar's career and where we are, where we fit in his various activities. Okay, so keep going.
The Gemara now concludes its proof that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. And it is written, and it came to pass in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 25th of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the 1st year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him forth from prison.
Okay.
Thus the Gemara calculates. Nebuchadnezzar reigned 8 years before he exiled Jehoiachin, as established above, and he reigned another 37 years after exile Jehoiachin, as just indicated. Here is 45 years, the entire duration of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, QED.
Good. Good. So let's keep going. We're doing great.
The Gemara now completes the computation of Belshazzar. And the 23-year reign of Evil-Merodach is known from tradition. And 2 years of Belshazzar's own reign, this is 70 years from the founding of the Babylonian kingdom. Hence, at the beginning of the 3rd year of his reign, Belshazzar said, now certainly the Jews will never be redeemed. He therefore brought out the sacred vessels of the holy temple and used them. In reference to this, Daniel told Belshazzar, above the master of heaven you have exalted yourself, and the vessels of his house they have brought before you. And following this, it is written, that very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. And it is written, and Darius the Mede received the kingship at the end of 62 years.
At the age?
Of 62 years.
Okay. So now, as I say, we're beginning to see again the way that this is, with all of its convoluted detail, it's still talking about the fact that we're this group that can't be gotten rid of, right? No matter how many times these different world rulers think that they've defeated us finally, they've gotten rid of us, definitively. They make their calculations, they see that it's all done, we're finished. No, they're always wrong. They're always wrong, and we have always endured. And when one way or another, they get their comeuppance. And in Belshazzar's case, he decides to take out the temple utensils and use them for his own party. And this is a desecration of these holy vessels. And Daniel says, "Oh, you think you're such hot stuff? Forget about it. This is it. God will not abide by this." And that very night, in retribution, he is killed by and Darius becomes the king. So it goes on. The endless wheel keeps turning. All right, we got a little bit more time. We're going to get very close to the end of our pages. Before, I don't want to forget, please do me a big favor. Send me an email that if you need the next couple of pages of Talmud. If you have your own hard copy, then it's not so urgent, but otherwise you may need it. So let me send it to you, but let me not leave off people. So send me a note, and then I'll be able to send everybody pages 12 and 13 that were coming up soon. Okay? Just a word from our sponsor. Back to this. The Gemara.
The Gemara presents the calculation of Achashverosh, who sought to avoid Belshazzar's mistake.
Right. That's bringing us back now to what's going on in the book of Esther. Right. So instead of just reading this as a simple, enjoyable story, we now see that all of this is about people thinking in deeper terms about what's, how secure am I in the world? What is this weird people that I need to keep worrying about when I don't think I should have to worry about them, right? The mystery of this peculiarity of Jewish existence. So Achashverosh is being, put, according to our own imagination, being put into this quandary of, am I right? Is it finally over? Did that prophecy prove to be false? Is it true? It can't be true anymore because I'm finding out, I'm calculating the years, and I think that now I can conclusively prove that prophecy was wrong. So it's all about, are our prophets believable? Is there truth in our prophecy? Or, is Achashverosh right? Okay.
Achashverosh said, Belshazzar erred in his calculation since he chose as his starting point the year of Nebuchadnezzar's rise to power. I shall calculate and shall not err. Is it written in the prophecy of Jeremiah for the kingdom of Babylon? No, it is written merely for Babylon.
Not the kingdom of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, but Babylon itself.
But for Babylon. To what does for Babylon then refer? To the exile of Babylon.
Which means what we experience, not Nebuchadnezzar's focus, but what the Jewish people experienced.
Thus, how many years must be deleted from Belshazzar's calculation, which began with the year Nebuchadnezzar ascended to the throne? The 8 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign before he exiled Jehoiachin must be deleted. So Achashverosh calculated and inserted these other years in place of the 8 deleted years as follows. The one remaining year of Belshazzar's reign, which Belshazzar did not include in his own calculation, and the 5 years of Darius the Mede and Cyrus of Persia, and 2 years of his own reign. Here is 70 years from the exile of Jehoiachin, QED.
You've said that before.
I know, but at the end, we got another QED. What can I tell you?
So what did he do when he convinced himself that this prophecy therefore was refuted? And that meant he was secure in having rulership over the Jewish people. Go ahead.
And after the date predicted for redemption passed, Ahasuerus followed the example of Belshazzar. Since Ahasuerus saw that the 70 years were completed and the Jews were not redeemed, he said, now certainly they will never be redeemed. He therefore brought out the sacred
Let's add a
vessel.
little emphasis. Since they weren't redeemed, he now said, now suddenly they will never
Be redeemed. The bold print here sometimes throws me off. He therefore brought out the sacred vessels of the holy temple and used them at a lavish royal banquet. As a punishment for his insolence, the Satan came and danced among them and killed Vashti.
Really?
Did you know that?
No.
Okay, so now if you ever wondered whatever happened to Vashti, now you know. Okay, so this ties up a few loose ends, doesn't it? So it's an interesting punishment, right?
Yeah, he screwed up, and so Vashti gets killed. Feminists would have
it's happened before. It's happened before,
and
right? But it also seems to therefore say that the death of Vashti is a punishment, right? Which of course he brings upon himself, right? He deposes Vashti and gets rid of her in a rage because Vashti doesn't want to participate in this party. So it adds a little extra element to how we think about what was going on. We usually just think about it purely in terms of the feminist idea of her being manipulated and objectified, which is inexcusable, of course. But here we get this little extra element of saying, what are you jumping around for? What are you celebrating here?
Where does Satan come from?
What do you mean, where does Satan come from?
Has he been in our?
He was actually he was in the session before you came in. Stuart brought him in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So Satan, is, yes, the troublemaker, the opponent, the one who's going to actually, we think of Satan as only the evil inclination or the demon, but also Satan sometimes is God's agent of punishment.
Is he Jewish or is he non-Gentile?
He's neither.
Okay, so it's in all the works.
He's a celestial being. He's an angel.
Oh.
Yeah. An angel meaning a messenger of God.
God.
Right? So, okay. Let's look at 37. It's a nice long note.
Note 37. The story of Ahasuerus's feast and the death of Vashti is recounted in the first chapter of the Megillah. Ben Yehoiada questions why Ahasuerus himself was not slain by the Satan for making personal use of the sacred vessels of the temple, just as Belshazzar died in punishment for that same brazen act. Why did the Satan kill Vashti in his stead?
Yeah, simple fairness. Forget about the fact that why should Vashti be killed, but Belshazzar was punished immediately with death for using these temple vessels. So if Ahasuerus is using these temple vessels, why isn't he killed?
Then Yehoiada explains that since in using the vessels, Ahasuerus consciously followed his predecessor's example, Belshazzar thus contributed in no small measure to Ahasuerus's sin. Hence, since the two kings were partners in Ahasuerus's transgression, justice demanded that they share the punishment as well. Since Vashti was Belshazzar's only child, her death signaled the demise of her father's lineage, a major penalty indeed. Nor was Ahasuerus unaffected by Vashti's death. In line with the Talmudic dictum that a man's wife is part of his being, in a very real sense, the Satan's arrows grievously wounded Ahasuerus as well.
Okay, so how satisfying is this note for everybody?
Not terribly.
Anybody else want to chime in?
How come?
Yeah.
Can you
Josie.
hear me?
Yes.
I'm having trouble with the computer. Why have we heard a different story all these years? That Vashti was banished in exile.
Because you weren't old enough.
You know,
I gotta be 80s.
I didn't hear anything about, Asmodeus when I went to Sunday school in Solomon. I feel like I was just, lied to, and there's just all this stuff left out.
Right.
That
we
was
should
Catholic
change-
perversion.
Right. There you go. We should change the name of our sessions to All You Ever Wanted to Know.
Now that you never.
About
Right, so,
Satan,
yeah.
about Vashti, about
Right.
all of it.
So, I mean, we don't have a bunch of time here, but clearly what happens in the Purim story is Satan is God's fixer, says Stuart. All right, yeah, don't mess with God's fixer. Ooh, ha. I loved the joke. There was a cartoon a little while back, and I think I've told it already because I like it.
Tell it again.
Two people are sitting at a restaurant, and the waiter comes by, and the waiter is a big man, and he goes, "How do you want your eggs? We could do it the easy way, or we could do it the hard way." So that's the cartoon. Back to this. For all of this kind of like arbitrary, random, what can I say? Apologetics or weirdnesses that are included here, which I don't want to completely give credence to. But instead of Ben Yehoyada, with all honor to Ben Yehoyada, he was a great sage. He was the greatest rabbi in Iraq about 150 years ago. But the Ben Yehoyada, that's the name of one of his books. It was also called the Ben Ish Chai, that's another one of his books. But what I want to say is the transition between what happened to Belshazzar and what happens with Achashverosh is part of the transition that we have between a very manifest operation of God in history and a much more hidden operation of God in history. The story of Purim is included in our Tanakh because we're convinced that this is the hand of God operating in history, but significantly without ever mentioning God in the story. So it's we who have to put God's presence into the story. We have to supply that missing piece. In the Belshazzar story, that's an earlier epoch where God is still zapping people clearly, and people are mentioning that God is going to do this. God is an active player and is ascribed, punishments and miracles and so on and so forth. The whole point of Achashverosh, why wasn't Achashverosh, zapped the way Belshazzar was zapped? I'm not answering the question, but I'm pointing out that question is the question that we asked to this very day. We joke about it all the time. I ate a cheeseburger on Yom Kippur and nothing happened. So, so what's real? The actions, the interventions, the presence, the reality of God is now, to use the heroine of Purim story, her name, Esther. Esther is in Jewish tradition understood as hidden, right? Anochi haster astir panai. I will hide my face. I will hide my presence. So this is part of what's going on here, that it no longer is when somebody does something, there's a quid pro quo immediately. That's it. Okay, you do something bad, God takes care of it. Instead, the convoluted, weird story of Purim is understood to bring about justice, but in a very unpredictable way, without God getting the credit, unless we want to give God the credit. So we'll stop here for now, and hopefully we'll continue next time.
Just a quickie, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Is this hidden aspect perhaps one reason that we have costumes?
Excellent. Yes, good. Good. And with that, we conclude. Hopefully, see you next time.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.